Hello, my friends. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. So this is a place where I talk about the books that I've been reading and other things going on in my life. Those of you who've been following my channel are aware that I am recovering from my fourth concussion. Mostly I'm fine now. There's still some things which I will be talking about, I think, later on in this video. But as a result of the concussion, I have had a special interest in books about the brain. So I have 6 different audiobooks about the brain to tell you about today. I've read them over the course of the past 6 months. And before I get to those, I'm going to tell you about knitting. So it's been a couple of weeks since I released my last video. Every time I think, okay, I'm going to make a video today, instead I end up knitting. So knitting has been a source of comfort for me lately. And so I'm going to tell you about this book, Sequence Knitting by Cecelia Campochiaro. The subtitle is Simple Methods for Creating Complex Fabrics. And so these sequences, the ones that I've done have been sequences of 12 stitches. You just keep repeating them and you get these wonderful results. So here's a scarf that I made. It's a type of broken rib pattern. It's the same on both sides. And I didn't have enough yarn. I was using up yarn that I already had. This is a hand spun wool that I got at my Fiber Guild's auction last year. So I didn't have enough to make a really long scarf. So I incorporated a slit so that you could slide one end into the other. And I should actually put it on to show you what it's like. And then, yeah, you can snug it up if you like. Really happy with how this turned out. And now I've been doing this series of hats. So once again, using up yarn from my stash. There's going to be 6 in all, 6 different patterns anyway. I might even make more. So this is all the same sequence of stitches, but on a different number of cast-on stitches. So yeah, this yarn, this color is from Amir cherry wood dye that I made, which gave me a nice yellow, and then I shifted it with iron to get this olive green. And this is done with dandelion blossoms. This is also dandelion blossoms. And this one is just simply a difference in pH. So the same amount of dandelions, but the chemistry of natural dyes is fascinating to me. So I'm fascinated by texture right now. And I've long been fascinated by color. This gold is from goldenrod blossoms, and then the gold yarn I dipped into indigo to get a blue cast over top of the yellow. So that's what you get there. So the thing with sequence knitting, or this particular pattern, is it's the same on both sides. So you can roll up the brim of these caps and you've still got the same pattern. It looks good on both sides. It's different from other types of knitting in that the way that you read your knitting is different. Reading your knitting means that you're looking at the stitches you've already created and using that to help you keep on track of what next stitch you create on top. And with this, you can still read the stitches you previously created, but it's pretty hard to keep track of what the stitches lie on top of because they keep changing. So for a 12-stitch pattern like this, I make sure and finish 12 stitches before putting the knitting down. So when I pick it up again, I know that I start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in that same pattern. And here is Frida, come to say hello. She loves my knitting. She likes to sit right on top of it, don't you? Yeah. So something that I've talked about in previous videos is how this most recent concussion has affected my ability to visualize when I read. And it has made it less pleasurable for me to read fiction because I'm just not getting the pictures that I was before. That ability is slowly returning, and this current read, Medicine Walk by Richard Wagamese, is one that is helping me with that. His writing is very sensual, incorporating not just images, but also the smell and the feel of things, like the prickle when you lean against the edge of wood that's been freshly sawn, that sort of thing. And it is really helping me, I think, to increase my ability to visualize. So thank you to the two Sarahs who are buddy reading this with me. You know who you are. I recently watched a TED Talk by Alex Rosenthal about aphantasia. So this is when you don't get any images. And I'll link that in the show notes if you're interested. And I'll also link the video that I made about visualizing. And now let's get into the books. First off, I'm going to talk about Our Brains, Our Selves. What a Neurologist Patients Taught Him About the Brain. And it's by Masud Husain. He's a neurologist at Oxford University, and he was born in East Pakistan, and then when he was a child, he emigrated to England with his parents. In this book, he has 7 case studies, and each of these 7 patients have a different type of brain disorder. And in many ways, this book kind of reminded me of The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks, a book that came out in the mid-'80s. I've long been fascinated by books about the brain. One big difference between that Oliver Sacks book and this one is Masud Husain seems to have more of a focus on his patients as individuals and how they can go about their lives within community, so in a social sense, with the brain challenges that they have. There were a couple of remarkable patients from history that Masud Husain brings up, and I have read about these patients before, so I'm going to link books about number 1, Phineas Gage. He was a railway worker, and back in the mid-1800s, an explosion caused a metal rod to go right through his brain, and he survived, but with a personality change. And another person is Henry Malazan, who's known as Patient HM. And Luke Dietrich wrote about him. Luke's grandfather was the surgeon who operated on patient HM. The patient had seizures that couldn't be brought under control, and so they did trepanation on him and a kind of lobotomy, actually. With patient HM, our scientists have been able to learn a lot about memory. Now, in that book, there's a lot about surgical hubris and ambition. And that, again, is very different from what Masud Husain is doing in Our Brains, Ourselves. He seems like a lot more humble person who's learning from his patients. A big question in the book is what makes us who we are. So there's our personal identity, but also our social identity. Masud is sensitive to the alienation that can be caused by a brain injury because of his own history of coming to the UK as a young person and facing racism and ostracism. And then there's also the context of, at the time that he was writing this book, it was during the time leading up to Brexit. So that's when he was seeing these patients. One of his patients is a young woman named Anna, who's from Poland, and she was talking on her mobile phone in Polish, and a group of young thugs beat her up as a result. She wasn't speaking English. And then she had to have emergency surgery, and she had a trepanation. And then a number of years after that, she had problems that were related to this trepanation, and that's when she saw Dr. Husain. And what happened with her was she lost the ability to feel that she had her right arm and her right leg. She had to be looking at them in order to know where they were and what they were doing. Very interesting case. Back in 2016, which was when I read Patient HM, I read 5 other books that had to do with trepanation. Some were fiction, some were nonfiction. And so I collected these references on my book blog that I used to be much more active with. And then subsequent to that, I made another collection of 10 references to trepanation. So if you're interested in stories about getting a hole drilled in your head, if you need it, like another hole in your head, I'm going to include links in the show notes. So basically what this book reinforces is that our personal identity is inextricable from our social identity. The need to belong to groups is fundamental to human existence. And personally, I am drawn to novels and memoirs that deal with themes of belonging. So a lot of immigrant stories, for example. There's a definition in the book of culture, which it's said to be the collective programming of the mind that distinguishes the members of one category of people from another. A newcomer needs to have the cognitive abilities to reprogram their mind so that it's different from the one they have grown up with, if they are to integrate or assimilate successfully. Not everyone is able to do this, and stereotyping and racism, for example, can make it difficult. So much to think about. And the acknowledgement that alienation is a health issue is also kind of front and center in this next book that I want to tell you about, How to Make Your Brain Your Best Friend. And it's by Rachel Barr. So she's a Scottish and neurodivergent, and she lives in Quebec. And this book is promoted as a delight-filled, evidence-based guide to taking better care of your brain. Rachel Barr writes, "Your brain is always trying to mend itself and always trying to protect you. It's in a constant state of flux, adapting, reconfiguring, finding new pathways, and it has an astonishing capacity for recovery. Only it doesn't always get it right." And as you can imagine, as my brain was healing from concussion, it was really good to read about the amazing capacity we have to recover. So, the democracy of loneliness. Barr writes, "Perhaps there's no greater example of our need to connect than the everyday experience of being deprived of it. Loneliness often gets the Hollywood treatment, painted as a dramatic, almost poetic affliction. But the truth is, loneliness is mundane, persistent, and unremarkable. Its defining trait is this very flatness. Acknowledge loneliness as a health issue. Be proactive about seeking connection. A lonely brain is a lying brain. Remind yourself that your brain may be tricking you into seeing rejection or hostility where none exists." Rachel Barr also talks about our innate desire to express ourselves. We're all trying to make sense of our complex inner worlds, and creativity helps us do this. She says we're confined by the boundaries of our own minds. This very limitation is what gives our creation significance, because each one bears the imprint of a singular, inimitable experience. They're shaped by the cultures that raised us, the places we've called home, the moments that made each of us who we are. Human creativity is more than just making things. It's the language we use to translate our experiences into something tangible. The need for self-expression runs deep in our evolutionary history. And she says creativity doesn't require mastery, nor does it need to be productive in a capitalist sense. Its value lies in the act itself. In a study of over 23,000 people, regular engagement with art and creativity was associated with lower levels of distress, better relationships, and higher emotional stability. Creative expression has been found to relieve anxiety and depression, regulate emotions, and even untangle the knots of trauma. Hence, knitting for me. Next, I have another neuroscientist who's in Quebec, Dr. Amir Raz. He's a professor of psychiatry, neurology, neurosurgery, and psychology at McGill University in Montreal. And his book is The Suggestible Brain, The Science and Magic of How We Make Up Our Minds. Amir Raz is also a professional magician, and he's done lots of research on placebo effects and hypnosis and suggestion. So some of the takeaways that I have from his book are that letting patients decide what kind of treatment they're going to get improves treatment outcomes. He says, if I were you, I would first try things that are safer than antidepressants. Physical exercise, acupuncture, omega-3 supplements, Tai Chi, and yoga. They all provide some benefits comparable to or better than antidepressant medication. And he writes further, whereas short-term studies show almost identical benefits from either drugs or placebo, long-term data shows that psychological interventions, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, perform significantly better than antidepressant drugs. He says they found that about 20% of the population is highly suggestible. This can be a good thing or a bad thing, being highly suggestible. Actually, I think I am one of those people. If I am reading about a certain kind of food, for example, I really want to eat that food. Yeah. Anyway, if we're being manipulated for good, that would be examples like to combat racism and hatred. But we can also be manipulated for evil purposes, the opposite effect. I was listening to this audiobook with my sister Simone on a long drive between Whitehorse and Dawson City last summer. And at a certain point in the book, we stopped it so that we could discuss, because what he talked about was the ethics of providing unasked for self-knowledge. So in tests where they were finding out if you were a highly suggestible person or not, so then there was a question, was it a good thing to inform people that that's what they were doing? And also to inform people about the result, because maybe you didn't want to know if you were suggestible, or some other kind of knowledge about yourself that's revealed in tests of this nature. So that was a whole new idea for me, and it's good to be able to have someone to bounce ideas off, when you're listening to an audiobook like this. So this next book, The Brain at Rest, How the Art and Science of Doing Nothing Can Improve Your Life, is by Joseph Jebelli. He is an Iranian-born British neuroscientist. And I'm pretty sure I talked about this audiobook in a previous video, but it's so good, I'll tell you about it again. He says that anxiety now costs the European Union 170 billion euros a year. And in America, it's $210 billion. The reasons are complex, but experts agree that a primary cause is our growing dislocation from nature. A study found that spending 2 hours per week in nature significantly improved psychological well-being. He said Americans spend 90% of their time indoors. It's probably similar in Canada. In the UK, 3/4 of children spend less time outside than prison inmates do. Nature prompts moments of introspection, creative thinking, and deep reflection, moments that are essential for our default network of psychological health. He says, we all know that our bodies need rest, but we have a problem accepting the same thing for our brain. And I have been practicing this. So in my knitting, for example, knitting goes great with listening to audiobooks or podcasts, but I have also been spending a lot of time knitting and not doing anything else. Just staring outside at the green grass. I'm so lucky to be living here in Victoria, but just looking at trees and knitting. It's good for the brain. This next book is also about nature and the brain, and that's what it's called, Nature and the Mind: The Science of How Nature Improves Cognitive, Physical, and Social Well-Being. It's by Marc Berman, who is the founder of environmental neuroscience, and he has lived and worked in both the USA and Canada. He talks about how the physical environment that surrounds us has a profound impact on our behavior and on brain development. He says we're currently living through an attention crisis, where our minds are constantly being bombarded with information calling for our directed attention. This constant taxing of our directed attention is draining us, causing us to be more mentally fatigued, which leads to problems of self-control and aggression. And this can also lead to mental and physical health problems. So contrast this with a softly fascinating environment. That's his description. It's something like forest or water, and this can counteract these attention deficits. And they found that we don't even have to like nature to get these effects. Even limited engagement with nature, so like a view of trees outside, can have positive effects on mood, cognitive abilities, depression, ADHD, productivity, self-regulation, physiological recovery from stress, caring for others in the environment, and grief. He says that view from your window isn't just an amenity, and it isn't just something we need when we're sick. It changes your experience of life and can have significant consequences for cognitive, physical, and social health. So if you're visiting a friend in the hospital, bring a plant, even a fake one. Yeah, something concrete that you can do. And another interesting thing in this book is a study that shows that perceiving curved edges caused people to think about spirituality and their life journey. So think about how in many churches there's a lot of curved edges. This kind of built environment causes people to think more about others, to be more connected to the physical environment, to have more positive and creative thoughts, and to think more about the past. One theory is that we have an emotional response to vast natural stimuli. And so these majestic built spaces that mimic patterns in nature expand our frames of reference, and this results in a feeling of smallness in the grand scheme of the universe, and adding to the sense that we are part of something larger than ourselves. The sense of smallness decreases selfishness and increases generosity, collaboration, and cooperation. Interactions with nature have been shown to increase pro-social tendencies. So, get outside if you can. And the final book that I want to tell you about is one for kids. So the audience for Wonderfully Wired Brains, An Introduction to the World of Neurodiversity by Louise Gooding, is for kids ages 8 to 12. The author herself is neurodivergent. She lives in Switzerland, and she emphasizes that everyone's brain is unique, and therefore we are all neurodiverse. So she uses specific terminology. Neurodivergent is the autism spectrum, ADHD, Tourette's. And neurotypical would be someone with typical development and cognitive abilities. And neurodiverse is the whole gamut of whatever kind of brain that you have. So this book is divided into several sections. She covers the parts of the brain and what we know about how it works, the history of brain science. She gives examples of people with extraordinary brains, like Florence Nightingale and Mozart and Michael Phelps. And the audiobook is very short. I actually don't recommend the audiobook for adults. I think the print might be better in this case, only because, well, for me anyway, the way the author reads her own work with emphasis on things like acknowledgements. Well, maybe I'm exaggerating that, but it's along those lines that it's like a special voice for speaking to children, maybe. I don't know how children react to that, but I didn't respond well. It's got good information in it, though. Anyway, that is all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. If you have any comments about these books that I've told you about, or if you're a knitter, let me know in the comments. Just say hello so I know who's watching, or put a little brain emoji in there. And I hope you keep yourselves well, and I wish you happy reading, everybody. Bye for now.